So I think a lot of familiar faces here, but in case anyone doesn't know who I am, I'm Angelo. I'm the developer on the proposed project, Jeffrey Solar. I say proposed, obviously, because there's some things we're waiting on, some regulations we drafted, and to see if there's really a feasible project here. However, a little bit of background on myself. Before joining NextEra, I was in the Army for 8 years, been all over the country, stationed in Washington State, and did my last bit of time in the 82nd Airborne. And then once I got out, I ended up with NextEra, and I'm looking forward now. So tried to bring you guys some sunshine. Hit the rain earlier today, but I think we'll take what we can get now. But what do we want to focus on today? So, like I said, we're still in this process of waiting for regulations to get drafted. We don't know what we have yet until we get that, and then we can make the proper plans going forward to forecast what can we build, is it feasible, and what we're going to address today is what's being drafted right now by the Commission, or the Planning Commission, setbacks, and anything that kind of takes away from the ability to build out to scale. And we're going to say the why behind it and kind of address, get a better understanding of what's going into these regulations and how does it affect the project. So I'll pass it on to Alan Anderson. He's a subject matter expert on this.
So again, my name is Alan Anderson. Kind of two things. I'm the chair of the Energy Practice Group at the Wholesale Law Firm. I'm in our Kansas City office. We're about 1,100 lawyers across the country, from New York to LA to Miami to Seattle, and parts in between. And then I'm also a professor at the University of Kansas Law School. So I teach an energy class there. And what's interesting about that is the processes we're going through right now are quite literally part of my class, what we teach about. But what I teach about is not really a technical part of how do we do land use and zoning. It's not about when you have to do notice, and when you have to do these things, how long you have to wait for this. It's why. What is land use, and what does it mean when we do something that creates a restriction on somebody's ability to use that? And so if you go back, I'm just going to go back to the origin of our country, because the Founding Fathers literally contemplated things like this in the process. So we win the Revolutionary War, and then there's a decision to make. So great, now we're our own independent country. What will our country be? In what form will it take? How processes will we have? And so we write the Constitution. We were lucky enough to have these phenomenal Founding Fathers that write our Constitution. It's an incredibly inspired document, but it's not by accident. They had real thoughts behind it. So the Founding Fathers wrote a series of papers called the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were the why for every part of the Constitution. And James Madison was the one who was kind of from your property rights founding father. And he writes the part of the Constitution, and then he'll later write the Fifth Amendment. And the Fifth Amendment is the part we know about the protection of life, liberty, and property. And he put those three on the same plane because life, liberty, and property he viewed equally. Because property is how you, in his belief, how we express liberty. It's how you make financial security for your family. It's how you interact with the greater world. So your property, how you utilize it economically, was how you express liberty. That's what Madison believed, and that's what he believed when he wrote the Constitution and the Fifth Amendment. And so when he writes the Federalist Paper number 10, it was to encourage ratification of the Constitution, and it was to make very certain that we would take in the holding and the use of our property and our private property very sacred. In fact, what he believed, what our Founding Fathers believed, that if we have a safe and good use, such as a solar project like this, because energy is critical infrastructure, it's something we must have. Every system in our country is based on having good and adequate energy, and low-cost energy, which this solar project would be. So if a use like this, what Madison believed, that the government's job was to protect against groups that would come together to take people's property rights. That's literally what Federalist Paper number 10 talks about. That we would have factions, groups that might go to and try to take away their neighbor's property. He saw that between the Revolution and the passing of the Constitution, there were physical takings of people's property. There were actual rebellions and things that if someone may have been too prosperous, they didn't like someone, they would go take property. The second, what he was concerned about, is they would go to the government. They'd go to the government and say, government, I want you to help us and do this and go this way, and have the government work with them to take some property away. So when you were passing the Constitution, what the Founding Fathers believed, at that point, it was to protect against, even if it was the majority of people, that the property was so fundamental to our liberty that it was the government's job to protect against taking the property. So when we think about private property and private property rights, people get this absolutely adverse. Or they say, what about my property rights, right? You hear that. It was never contemplated, in fact, that the property wouldn't have noise, that it wouldn't have sound, that it wouldn't have activity. Washington, Madison itself, Monroe, Hamilton were all farmers. So when they're talking about property, they mean property being used, property having sound, having activity on it. So what it was meant to do was to protect against groups coming together and taking away the property. So here we are at this stage where we're contemplating regulations. And as Madison and economists believe, if you put excessive restrictions on the use of property, it's the same thing as taking away that property. So there's a project here, as you heard from Angelo, if we have excessive setbacks or extreme limitations where people wouldn't be able to participate because projects has a limitation on acreage, that will take away people's ability to use their property. So if you think about property rights from a constitutional base, a very conservative concept, and it's how we exercise it in the capitalist economic system, it's allowing a project to move forward in a safe and healthy way such as this one, but not having these extreme restrictions. So that's kind of how then we move forward, and that's when we get to land use and zoning. But the origin story is the protection against coming together. The other part we're going to hit on, we talked about this before, is solar energy and agricultural land. And because you hear this coming up again, and so people say, but I'm concerned about the agricultural land. Well, I'll give you a couple of statistics about Jackson County specifically. Between 2017 and 2022, 21% of the agricultural land was taken out of agricultural land use. That's not from solar projects, that's from the eastern red cedar, which in Kansas has taken up between, since 1990, 930,000 acres have been lost at the eastern red cedar. The other thing is encroachment for small parcels where people put, small parcel homes and things that come out of the agricultural lands too. So that's the thing. So we're having loss in Jackson County already due to other things. The second big statistic is that from a family farm perspective. So the first is we're losing them from acreage total, but also between 2017 and 2022, so it's a fairly short period of time, there was a 19% decrease in family farms. So the thing about a solar project is it allows someone who wants to keep their acreage, allows them to do that. So the family farm who wants to participate in this project, talk about property rights, how they decide this is how they want to use their economic use. It also protects the family farm and the land. So at the end of a solar project, it is a temporary use. It may be a long-term temporary use, but after the end of this use, that land can go back into farming or ranching or whatever use would be pertinent at that time. If we lose it to these other uses, it's gone forever from a farm and agricultural perspective. So if you want to protect agricultural lands, solar project, along with people using their property rights, is the most effective way to do that. So those are the two topics I want to cover, and I think we're open for questions and people have them.
I got a question. As far as the National Environmental Policy Act, I see that you guys at Jeffries, your solar project has entered into that lawsuit. Can you explain why and what's your plans are for the National Environmental Protection Act? So you're talking about protecting farmland.
Well, to make sure I got your second part, I got the first part. So NEPA, so National Environmental Protection Act, and then you said the project has entered into the lawsuit?
Yes, I have.
Motion to dismiss.
Well, you're talking the county has entered into it.
No, I'm talking about Jeffrey. They seek an injunction to be included into this lawsuit.
Okay, so I'm not working on that litigation, so I can't talk about that part.
Okay.
But NEPA is, and I'm also not an environmental lawyer, but I'll give you the non-environmental lawyers on that. If there is kind of a federal nexus with a project, so if you're selling to a federal utility, if you're using federal lands, it requires you to go through the NEPA process. If you're not, it doesn't require that process. And so I understand there's that litigation out there. I'll let that kind of resolve itself as part of that. But that's, in the case, there's no project that's ever been required to go through NEPA that didn't have some of those federal nexus, such as on federal lands or with a federal utility. So other than that, on the litigation itself, I'm not part of it. Anything else?
I'll just shed a little bit more light, I guess, on some of the setbacks that are proposed to kind of try and shape a picture of what you can see is like, from a project standpoint, so say you start factoring in some of the setbacks, you get, all right, they say 1,000 feet from a non-participating parcel, and then you get a decibel restriction of 40 decibels or dBAs. When you factor all these together, imagine you're taking out a bunch of pieces of the pie. So kind of what Alan was saying about, your rights as a landowner, you're taking away a lot of those chunks that the landowners could use. Just to put it in perspective.
That's impact the benefits.
Yeah, that could impact the benefits that would go to the itself. So. Any other questions?
Is there any restrictions on how far out a farmer can plant his crops on his land? He could go right to the property line.
From our standpoint, like if
No,
you signed up?
Just any farmer planting on his land doesn't have a restriction of 500 feet or 1,000 feet from a neighbor or something like that.
Yeah.
I kind of look at the solar panels as being pretty close to farming, so I don't see why there should be a restriction on how close to your property line you can go. Because to make a project like this work, you need to concentrate into the acreage that you're going to develop, rather than spread it all out.
Yeah, there's an engineering concept too, where if you place a restriction that doesn't have value to anyone, so excessive setbacks don't add value to anyone. So if a person doesn't want the project, they're not going to allow them to like the project anymore if you had 100 feet. But it also doesn't add any health or safety benefits. So when we get to excessive setbacks, they don't provide any value to anyone, but they harm people, so people want to participate. People said, in my property, I want to farm the sun. I said that the land, I want my combine to be the solar panels, bringing that in. I want to take it to the electricity, same as I would take it to the dryer or something. That all it's doing is taking away someone's ability, their property, to use that and getting no benefit to the community. The setbacks, we have solar projects, we put on schools, we put solar on homes, we put solar everywhere because it's incredibly safe. And so when you just have these setbacks, all you're doing is hurting the project, you're hurting those people, you're hurting the community, because then if we don't do a project, there's an incredible amount of value that goes into the communities, and there's no benefit to it. And we don't do it to these other uses. There's sound from farming, there's sound from other things. Here, we measure it, we do it, we make sure it's proper. Yeah.
And there's actually examples of other projects that once they were built, the participating landowners were actually able to buy more farmland and actually increase their production. So it worked hand in hand to actually benefit them to do more farming and understand that as well.
And what you find in communities, they've studied it on the wind side more, because obviously wind's been around a long time. If a community is a host of a wind project, so similar to this sort of solar project, the community is able to invest, people participate or invest more in their farms and ranches, invest more in their communities, they can do succession planning, they do all those things that are incredibly beneficial to the long-term benefits of a community. And then those communities are better. They have better schools, they have better infrastructure. Well, guess what? They draw people in. If you have a better community center, you have better fire police protection, you have better schools, you draw more people. So hosting a solar or wind project brings so much value to the overall community that it would be incredible loss if it was going to come to the county.
Other questions?
How much of with the solar, you're producing when the sun's out, is there storage ability in the project?
For this project, there is no storage being planned for it. It is a capability that we could do, but it's not in the plans for this one. If in the future Jackson County wants to, we'd love to be able to deliver that technology, and it's very effective and it's very beneficial, but for right now, no, it's not planned for this project.
Is the energy from the proposed project going to a certain group of businesses, or is it going into the grid pool?
It goes into the grid. So the point of interconnection would be the Jeffrey Energy Center. At that point, it's into the grid. It's not going specifically to one entity or another.
Which is great for Kansas ratepayer. The more low-cost energy we can put into the grid, the better. We also, if Kansas wants to continue to be competitive, and we've been incredibly competitive in bringing in businesses, being economically competitive, we need more energy of all types. There's 2 new gas plants in Sumner and Reno County that are kind of going through that process. We'll need those. We'll need more of those. We need wind. We need solar. We need it all. And if we want to stay competitive both on a rate basis and an ability to attract businesses, we need all the above energy. So like this solar project would be incredibly helpful for more low-cost energy here in Kansas. Great.
I see that the city of Holton, I think they have, correct me if I'm wrong, but they only allow 5% of the energy that you consume at your house to be from solar.
Net metering? Yes, and I'm not an expert on net metering, but yeah, they have a limitation, so you can only do it, so this is for personal use, so for your behind-the-meter consumption, you can only cite a project to a certain percentage of your overall need, and if you have excess capacity at any time, it's limited on how much can go back in to get paid for it. So it's limited. They've upped it, I don't remember what they've upped it to over the years, but yeah, for your own personal use, there's that. It's limited. Yeah, one thing about battery storage, I'll tell you, so it's not planned for this project, but boy, I think it's exciting. It is so good for all sorts of things. So if you think about battery storage, when we have excess capacity or kind of a peak of capacity, the prices are real low, they fill the batteries. When prices go up, we get that hot, we're in that period of time, or the winter, where it's real cold or real hot. What that means is prices are spiking because demand's getting to the top. They release the batteries and it creates this incredibly downward pressure on prices, so our prices stay lower. So as a Kansas ratepayer, we want more battery storage. It's incredibly beneficial for the grid, for the pricing there. It's also, think about if we have a winter storm or a summer storm, they fill the batteries up and then they're ready. So that if we have outages somewhere, we have the batteries to kind of go into the system. Texas has been one of our biggest battery storage markets, and the controller just put out a big study there. They've saved hundreds of millions of dollars every time they have one of these short-term events because the batteries are able to keep the prices from spiking, meaning everyone saves money throughout their system. So battery storage, not part of the project, but boy, I'm excited for it from the economics perspective.
So knowing that batteries weren't an option for this particular area, that's the reason we picked the proposed project area was due to proximity to Jeffries and grid hookup.
Well, there's a lot of factors that go into where we prospect an area. I think one aspect that was really enticing about this one was Evergy's anticipation to retire some of the coal plant. Obviously, that creates a backfill need for energy into the grid, and there's only benefit there, not just for the community, but as a whole, because you have to backfill that. So, and it's a pretty drastic amount of megawatts. So, it's our part in helping, with that energy dependency.
Is it 2030 that we're looking for closing down?
It's
No.
still near. It's so it got pushed.
They're not.
Back a little bit, but
They're not actually. My husband works there. And they're not.
Yeah, no. What we're going to find here over for a while is I think closing Anchorage gas is going to be probably delayed if it gets poured on. We have a couple things. Just demand continues to be needed. We have multiple things all hitting at once. Higher demand from new uses, so new advanced manufacturing, electrification, all those things at once. So we have more general use. Then we have more weather needs, so we have a little bit hotter in the summer. Actually, interestingly, our biggest problem is bigger, colder stretches during the winter, so higher demand from the weather. Then what we found, they're doing they rate all the different sources of energy, so that's how they figure out how much we can have at any one time. They're going back through and doing a recalculation of all the rating, so we're going to find that the gas plants are going to get rated lower because during the coldest times they're not able to operate at 100%. Same thing with coal. So to make up for that, we need more energy to get it back where we were. And then because of bigger fluctuations, the grid manager is going to require us to have a little extra capacity above. So you get 15% above what we should ever need on the hottest day, coldest day. So that's going on. So with all those pressures hitting us, it's going to be difficult to probably see closing things that had previously been done. So we'll see.
But in the original prospecting, that was kind of the.
Tower 3 and Tower 1 and 2 with staggered rate, yeah.
Regardless, like Alan said, demand's going up. It's going to continue to go up across the state, across the country, and you don't want to be behind the 8 ball. So.
Yeah, we need all the sources. That's the thing. It's not an either or. And we will have some that are, because some of our old, plants are really expensive. And so when we're able to kind of use those less, we'll want to do that, it's less. But for now, we have to handle the demand issue first. So all the above.
In Jackson County, aren't there 3 or 4 different groups that are supplying power here? Used to be company names because I was never involved with them, but there used to be some pretty high electrical power to the west of town, about 15 miles. And a group that came over from the east too, where as was KPNL Energy, whatever you're going to call it now, was the best one to be on. If you were on one of the others, you were getting, they were buying, the group that you were on was buying it from somebody else and adding more to it and selling it to you. Really not benefiting you outside of you had power there. It was you were lucky.
Yeah, so we have if I've got it right here, we have Evergy's part of the territory, and then you'll have the co-ops, and they'll each have their own territories. They have the exclusive right to sell to customers in those territories. They'll have different rates based on how they procure their own energy. So yeah, each will have their own different rates and systems.
Well, here we get a bill for the energy or your electric bill. Then below it, there's a fuel charge.
Yeah.
The fuel charge is never figured into your cost per day. You have to have the two together and divide it to see what you're actually paying for that.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was a little backwards, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it makes it look like you're getting low-priced energy, but you're not when you add it in there and then divide the kilowatts into it.
Yeah, looking at the utility bill is a difficult thing, and it's kind of, there's a regulatory background behind it where they have to get their rates approved by the state, but then their fuel charge is allowed to fluctuate with their fuel charge. So they basically have the set rate, and you think, oh, that's it. But then you have to figure out the other add-ons. So it's difficult. I don't think they're trying to make it difficult, but it is. Yeah, I know. Yeah, don't ask. In fact, when we've had that, we have people who know how to read every one of the lines. So occasionally we've done that. It's not me because I can't tell as much as I do.
Is this dependent on government subsidies? Are you figuring that into it?
Yeah. So right now, obviously, there's I think everyone's kind of aware there's the budget reconciliation bill that's going. The way that we'll see where that turns out. I think that's so much flux is really tough because I'm not tuned in enough to say where that will end up. But if you take the one that comes in with solar, the investment tax credit, the production tax credit. So first thing I always say, and I even talk about this in my class, every source of energy has some subsidy. If you want to invest in oil and gas, well, I can get you into some right now. I invest in oil and gas because it is incredibly great to write off in your taxes. You can write off intangible drilling costs. I'm not very good at picking good wells. So if you're looking for good wells, there's probably someone else, but I know where some wells are. And you can write off somewhere, I think, it's usually between 75 upwards to 90+% of your taxes a year long. And so we have enormous amounts of oil and gas infrastructure that's done through all the taxes and so forth. So all of the sources have something. Wind and solar, the only difference, the story behind it is like the tangible drilling cost deduction went into the code, I think it was in 1913. Pretty mature industry at this point, but we don't talk about it because it never sunsets. The reason why the ones for wind and solar get so much attention, I think they're the only source, is because we talked about it every few years. So the origin story of the production tax credit was George Bush. He was president, and he had Chuck Grassley, who's the biggest proponent of it in Iowa, and they kind of got that in place in 1993, I think it was, give or take a year, but 1993. And then it's been continued on. We've had a couple times from similar where it's sunsetted, and then it came back, and so we have a little bumpiness, but we talk about it. So it gets so much attention. So it makes people think, gosh, you guys are the only ones that have subsidies. It's not true. So now here we are again. So under the previous Trump administration, it was reviewed, continued. At different times we were scheduled to kind of have a phase out. I would anticipate, I think, this is worth looking paper, but that they may end up something with a phase out. And the way a tax credit works is once the project locks it in, then it stays with it for the life of the project. So production tax credits for 10 years. So if the project qualifies to it would keep that for the 10 years. Future projects could be impacted, but if the project qualified for it, it would continue. What's interesting about the production tax credit, investment tax credit, versus even the mechanical drilling costs, the company doesn't put that in the pocket. What happens is these are incredibly just fierce competition for these power purchase agreements. So every companies compete for the same ones that they have. They have big competitors. And so what they have to do is they have to build that into the price that they're selling power for. So that's part of why we have such low cost power. So that production tax credit, we all get that because it's driving the price down. So it actually flows through to the ratepayers. The company doesn't keep that. So if you take it away, people are going to pay for that difference, or all of us ratepayers. So projects will go forward, they'll be a little more expensive. Because it'll still be, we have all the numbers, the SARD studies this every year, I think the 18th version's just come out. If we take the production tax credit, good projects will still move forward. It'll just make our electricity more expensive. Their impact is not, other than they could have some projects still move forward, but the good projects will just become more expensive. So we'll all pay for that loss of that production tax credit. The investment, so just to kind of compare it, if you look at oil, so right now we have issues going on in Iran, potentially the price of oil goes up, which it really hasn't yet. The people who are doing oil here locally, they'll just pocket the extra as the price goes up because we're talking about Iran. Their costs didn't go up a bit. So there's kind of the same. That's the kind of difference on those two subsidies. So long-winded story, but some projects will still, if they qualify, they'll keep it. So regardless of what happens with the budget reconciliation, and if projects do, other projects will go forward, just be a little more expensive for us.
I read somewhere, and it was probably on the internet, we know everything there is true, that some of the newer panels are able to capture even in the evenings when it gets dark, because the light, the rays are still coming down. They don't shut off.
I'm not aware of that, but that'd be great.
The technology continues to get better and better. So, we have bi-directional, so, you have the panel that's catching it actually from that bounces off the ground and the top. So we continue to advance on those. It wouldn't shock me if there, of course, are some models. It's going to be small. It's not going to be a lot. We do solar extensions, because you're gathering solar radiation all over the place. It's probably, but it is pretty phenomenal, the technology and how it keeps advancing. Same thing with wind projects. There were places in the early turbines that just weren't good enough to catch wind in low wind places. Now they're so good they catch it, for some new projects in Mississippi that never thought we did projects. And then with solar panels, they're good. And we also forget Kansas is equal to or better. I get a little challenge with some people from Florida, but we're at least ranked the same as the Sunshine State. We have incredible solar resource here, world class. We are better here, I think, than any part of Spain. Can you believe that? We think of Spain's going to be this great spot, but we have the solar radiation maps and we have phenomenal solar resources.
I got a question. Where'd you get that information at? Because I'd like to read up on that.
I'll send you the map.
Yeah,
Give me your email, I'll send you the map.
So give me your email address.
It's
Or give me a card. You got a card?
I got one of
Put
my
your
cards
email
on
on
the
it.
back table right there. If anybody wants one of my
Yeah.
cards, they're back there.
I'd like for you to send me where we're in the premium solar park.
You bet.
Yeah.
It's a good thing about facts. They're
Considering solar radiation. I was talking to some Bill Gates
Capital hails
is working
and
on
high winds,
solar dimming,
wildfires.
to protect solar dimming,
okay.
to protect the planet from heat from the sun because of course the climate. How's that going to impact your solar panels? Seems like kind of a pull.
My guess is that will not impact anything around it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but I would not guess it.
Well, if they dim the sun, and
Yeah.
at all, it's going to impact how much you produce.
Yeah, so from a conceptual idea, they're having something actually happen to so long.
Well, I don't know about these guys, but they've been working on a lot longer than they let us know about.
Yeah. If we had, theoretically, if you had something that changed the solar radiation, sure. I just would tell you, I would be around to see.
I'll hold your breath.
Let's see. But they are doing like so. People have seen there's a nuclear plant that Bill Gates is kind of working on out in Wyoming. Has some new technology. It hasn't yet been approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but we'll see. But I think we'll see nuclear too. Nuclear right now is just so expensive to build a nuclear plant. The last one we've done was in Georgia, and the price is it's something like 8 to 10 times what we pay for a solar project or rebate. It's many multiples. It's $144 an acre is what the price would be required for that. So we'll do nuclear, but it's like our local utility said, we're just going nowhere near it. It's so expensive. So we'll get there, but it's going to be a lot. And it takes a long time to both get permitted. Some sort of startups.
So you can start up tomorrow.
Yeah, so we have some existing facilities, 3 of them, that will get restarted. There's one in Iowa, it's an NextEra's project. The 3 Mile Island, that's one of the units that will get going. And that would probably be fairly, from a regulatory perspective, I mean, they're hoping to do as early as like a couple of years. I wouldn't put my money on it, but it could be within 5, which would be really fast. So, but that only works for ones that are already there. It's a new one that would take a long time. Okay. And those also won't benefit ratepayers or the grid. They're going for specific,
Yes,
for data centers and stuff. So that's great, but they're not necessarily going to be, at least the one at 3 Mile Island will go for, I think it's Microsoft and someone else.
At least they wouldn't be pulled from the grid.
Right. Sure. No, it's not a bad thing, but just it won't. The ratepayers won't see that benefit. But you're right; it does have a secondary benefit. That's a good point.
Where are you sourcing all of these solar panels? China?
And that we know where they're sourced. You have a lot of different sources, and so like at this point, you won't know what solar panels you use until you get proximity to the project, because you can't price things yet. So I don't.
Or most of them?
Those are actually a mix, but a lot of the manufacturing had already been coming out of China and other places. So that had been long happening. In fact, there had been some new plants in the U.S. for the first time over the last several years. So that kind of transformation had already begun. So I think, and it will obviously continue to. So by the time this project goes through construction, you'll see those different.
Well, we'll still be here if anybody wants to come up for just talk one-on-one or ask additional questions. If not, I got my card back there on the table. We got some handouts. You can take some of those if you'd like. But thanks for coming by.